Hey guys, David here and welcome to another video. Today we're gonna take a look at the artillery Sidewinder X1. It, as you can see, is a quite large printer. It has a build volume of 300 by 300 by 400 millimeters, just like the CR10, and it is actually really cheap as well. It's only about 400 to 450 bucks, and today we're gonna take a look at if it is as amazing as it is on paper. So full disclosure, Artillery did send over this printer for review, but they did not pay me in any way, and I'm going to try to be as objective as at all possible and tell you all the good parts and also all the bad parts of this printer. So it starts off with the box that you get it in, and when you open it up you see that there is a lot of really high quality packaging foam, and I don't see any way that even the worst manhandling of this package, unless it gets sewn in half, could damage this printer. It's very well packaged. And the assembly is also super quick. Like, this entire upper frame is assembled as one piece, the lower frame is assembled. You only have to bolt them together, connect a couple cables, mount a spool holder, and you're done. It shouldn't take more than half an hour or so. And there are even very good instructions included where surprisingly even the translation to German is very good. Of course there's also an English manual, but it's the first time I've seen a actually proper German translation that did not sound like it was Google translated from a Chinese manufacturer. And while we're talking about how everything goes together and fits together, it goes together very well, and as you can see it looks extremely clean. There are no like big cables and wires flying all over the place, and that's because in many places this printer uses ribbon cables. They just plug in as one cable that goes up here, goes to a breakout board where it breaks out for the motor and the limit switch and all that good stuff, and you don't have to plug in a million different cables that are hanging all over the place. It's all nicely managed in this beautiful black ribbon cable. I think this is a very great move and more people should do that. The only thing I'm kind of worried about are like the connectors for the ribbon cables, as these tend to be kind of fragile, and while they did send replacement ribbon cables with the printer, they did not send replacement connectors, and that is like the most likely point of failure I can see with this system. But I would take these ribbon cables over what the other printers are using any day of the week. And it's not just with the ribbon cables where they really thought about the design. The entire machine is very well engineered and designed through and through. You can tell that they didn't just rush it out of the door as quickly as possible. You have this full sheet metal enclosure for the bottom compartment where all the electronics are housed. There's a nice touchscreen here in the front, and the power supply and everything is in here, nicely cable managed as well. And compared to many other electronics compartments, they aren't just using the standard old loud fan of a power supply that you can get really cheap. It actually is very quiet. And I'm not talking about the motors or anything, I'm just talking about the electronics. You can hear fan noise, of course, but it is a lot quieter than any of my other machines, apart from maybe the Prusa, but that's a very different price class. And while I'm talking about silent, they also are using dynamic drivers, which means that the motors also are very quiet, which is just so great. The CR10 is one of my loudest printers before I did the modifications, and this one, which is basically direct competitor to the CR10, is, apart from the Prusa, my quietest printer. And continuing on with things that are really great, this build plate. It's a nice glass sheet that is not just clipped onto another aluminum sheet, but it's a glass sheet with the heating elements stuck directly to the bottom and a sheet of insulation below that. And there's a very nice coating on top of this sheet. Now, I'm not usually a fan of like fancy coatings that you can't remove, but this coating is absolutely fantastic. For PLA, you just heat the build plate to maybe like 40 to 50 degrees Celsius. You print on it, it sticks extremely well. You don't have to have it super close or have brim or anything. And as soon as the build plate cools down, it just basically pops off. Now, I've heard that many times of many different surfaces that are claiming that this works this way, but this is the first time I actually had this experience. And from what I can tell, this surface is also really durable. I didn't damage it at all with any of my attempts, even when I was like impatient and didn't want to wait for it to cool down, and I used a spatula to scrape at it and remove it. I didn't leave any marks. The only marks I left was when I dragged the nozzle over it when it was touching the build plate, and that would damage any print surface, so I can't deduct any points for that. The heated bed is also mains powered, which means that instead of using the 12 or 24 volts that the power supply is outputting, it uses directly the 110 or 220 volts from the socket, and that just allows it to have a lot higher power without needing wires that are super thick in a super giant power supply. Now, if it wasn't done properly, that would be very dangerous since you could electrocute yourself, but all the wiring is done extremely well. There's proper strain relief, it's all insulated very well, and I don't have any worries. And what this results in, that this giant 300 by 300 print bed heats up extremely quickly. It's by far the fastest heated bed to heat up out of all of my printers. It basically heats up as fast as the nozzle heats up, which also heats up super fast. Now, before we get too deep into the other features, I want to quickly talk about some other aspects of the build quality. And as you can see, there are these super thick triple wide beams here, both for the x-axis here and also for the y-axis. Now, on almost all the T-slot printers that I've seen, the x-axis has always been just a single slot, and that is kind of flimsy on a printer this large. But I mean, for the x-axis, I wouldn't necessarily say that triple slot is necessary. Maybe double slot would be enough, but I never complain about an overbuilt machine. And for the y-axis, it is very, very appreciated to have this wider triple slot, as this means that the rollers that are rolling on it are further apart, giving the whole bed a just more rigid feel. Like, there's almost no flex at all in this bed, which just makes for a lot sturdier machine and allows you to go even faster. The only kind of issue I've seen with the rigidity is these super nice triple wide beams here and here, but then the connections between the vertical beams here and the base are just two bolts into it. There's no L bracket, no nothing that reinforces it, and this leads to this whole assembly being kind of a little bit wobbly. Now, it's not bad, like, it works perfectly fine, but if I see any point where this machine is not rigid enough, then it will be the connection between the upright frame and the base. Like you can buy for the CR10, it would probably be a good upgrade to just add some diagonal supports here, as this would make this whole machine so much more rigid and basically make it a solid unit. Edging closer to the main aspect of a 3D printing itself, let's take a look at this hot end and extruder. Compared to most printers in this price range from like Chinese manufacturers, it's not using a Bowden setup but a direct drive extruder, which is really nice to see. It just has so many advantages over these Bowden setups that have a lot of flex in them. It's finicky, and I much prefer direct drive extruders. And with proper stepper motors, it's not a weight issue either. And continuing on with really good things about this extruder, the hot end itself is not just the regular hot end, but it's the volcano style, meaning that the melt zone where it melts the material is much longer. And this means that you can work with some very high flow rates. I've done some testing where I went at 200 millimeters a minute, going around at 0.3 millimeter layer height with a 0.8 millimeter extrusion width. That's twice the nozzle diameter in extrusion width, and it's very quite tall, and the extruder was perfectly able to keep up. Now at 200 millimeters a minute, you can't expect perfect print results anymore, but that's not the point of this test. It was just to see that although this material was like moving extremely fast, and it was just like jogging through a material, and like it probably had only maybe like half a second, if at all, inside of the melt zone, it was able to extrude perfectly fine. If you try that on a regular hot end, like on the CR10, Ender 3 and all these other machines, you would be never able to just melt that material quick enough, since the melt zone is just a lot smaller. Now this immense amount of heat that you can generate there at the extruder, combined with the big heated bed that can also output a lot of temperature. The part cooling fan should be absolutely amazing and cool that print down very, very fast so you can actually print fast. But this part cooling fan, to just put it blunt, is absolute crap. Now, on a regular like Ender 3, it would be fine, where like the heated bed is not that big, so there's not as much heat coming off of it that heats up your print, and you're not gonna print as fast, and it would work fine. But here, printing a regular Banshee at pretty fast speeds, but this machine can handle it, with the bed at 50 degrees Celsius, it would just curl up like crazy, even with the part cooling fan at 100%. Only once I like reduced the heated bed temperature, reduced the nozzle temperature a bit, and only then I was able to get a Banshee that is actually clean. And that is not something that you should have to do to just get a clean result. So apart from the diagonal struts that I would add to upgrade this machine, I would definitely replace that part cooling fan. It also is by far the loudest part of this machine when it's running at 100%, and for that noise that it makes, it does not move a lot of air. And when we're looking at the print results, this mediocre part cooling fan is pretty much the only thing that I can complain about. There also is a tiny amount of like fuzzy stringing, but that's not a big deal, and just with a blowtorch or like a hot air gun can be removed in an instant, or in some prints it's not even noticeable. Other than that, the prints come out clean. There is a very smooth surface for the Z-axis, and text is very legible. I can't complain. Only the overhangs, of course, also suffer from the mediocre part cooling fan and are therefore not as great. Bridging performance is still surprisingly good, but over longer bridges, once again, the part cooling fan is just not enough. And these print results, they don't just work great at like 50 to 60 millimeters a minute, which is what I usually run an Ender 3 or a CR10 at. But on this printer, I found that you can go really quite fast. My like normal print speed is at around 100 millimeters a minute on this printer, and I've done some tests at 150 where it still works pretty much okay. This is really quite impressive, especially considering that there is a giant bed that has to be moved back and forth, and there is a direct drive extruder that is also quite heavy. That just means that the drivers are tuned very well, that they can have fast acceleration without overshooting or anything. This high print speed combined with a big working area and a high flow extruder just makes this perfect for printing big things. I printed this beautiful castle here. Model is going to be of course linked down below, and it took only 2 days. Now of course 2 days is a long time, but before I started tuning the speeds and stuff, it was over 4 days, which is what it would take on a other printer. Now, sadly, I forgot to disable support material, and, well, it was impossible to remove. It lodged itself everywhere, and so the model itself did not turn out as great as it would. But it still is very nice to look at from a bit of a distance, and just shows what is possible with this printer. I could have even scaled it up even more, but even this took almost an entire roll of filament. There is one little other thing, though, that I have to complain about, and it is the spool holder. You can't quite see it in this frame, but I'm gonna insert some B-roll here, and it is the kind where you put the roll on top of it, which works great, but the issue is that it only includes the bearings and no connection between them. That means that you have to adjust the distance between the two plates perfectly for every spool. And I never noticed this before, but I found out that almost every spool of mine has a different width. That means that every time I changed color, I had to adjust this plate, which means loosening 2 bolts, moving it, tightening the bolts, and then I can change the filament. That's just absolutely terrible. So there is a quick fix. I just printed some connection pieces where there is now, instead of just 2 single bearings, there is a nice long rod that the filament rides on. I set it to a little bit wider than my widest filament, and so I can now put any spool on there and it works perfectly fine. I just wish that this was included in the box. So in conclusion, we can say that this is a very, very polished machine. all around, from the beautiful touch interface that is very, very responsive, to the inclusion of a USB port that you can use to have your files instead of a flimsy micro SD card, to just a beautiful bed that does not require any maintenance or anything, and the nice ribbon cables and all the other enclosure and everything. This is just a very well-rounded and beautifully engineered machine. And the best thing is that this machine only costs a little bit more than something like the CR10. And for what you pay more, like $50 or something like that, you really get, instead of a machine that works but is really industrial and kind of just hacked together, you get a machine that is beautifully engineered, a whole package, and just a joy to work with. So I can highly recommend this machine. Of course, it's going to be linked down below. And if you're looking for a machine that is a little bit bigger than just your standard small, like Ender 3 style machine, this is a very great choice. So that's it for this video. Make sure you hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe, share this video to everyone that you think would be interested in this printer, so that as many people as possible can see it. You can also check out my Instagram, link down below, where I post a lot more recently, that you can see a lot of behind the scenes stuff and what I'm working on right at the moment, instead of only when it comes out to YouTube. So thanks for watching, and until next time.